I would, quite promptly hand over to our first speaker, which is actually Jessica Reeder. Jessica Reeder is an all-remote integrated marketing campaign manager from GitLab, and she's talking about the topic GitLab and remote work. And it's going to say a lot of interesting things here. So give me a second to set everything up so she can start with her presentation. Only takes a few moments. And then we should be good to go. You know how it is, switching between all the windows always takes a few moments of time, but we should be there in a minute. So there we go. Quickly open this up. And then, I think one last thing about the presentation, you see it on the slide already, GitLab and remote work, and Jessica is going to present a holistic approach to leading enterprise transformation. So Jessica, welcome to the show, and I leave the word or the microphone over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Tony, and hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Reeder, and as we kick off this exciting day of talks, I would love to start with one of the topics that is leading many of our conversations these days, and that's remote work for enterprise organizations. So I want to start by asking you a question. Beyond an internet connection and a laptop, what do you and your team actually need to effectively work remotely? Now, if I had asked you this question 6 months ago, your answer might have been very, very different from what you would say today. But in the past few months, we have all learned quite a lot about what it really means to work remotely. As Sid mentioned, GitLab is an all-remote company. In fact, we are the largest organization in the world to operate fully remotely. We're also an open core organization. So since before the COVID crisis, we've been dedicated to openly sharing our knowledge and our practices. We have over 1,300 GitLabbers representing 65 countries so far. We have over 100,000 organizations that co-create with us, and there are over 3,000 contributors making merge requests every day. And in February and March of 2020, we and other remote organizations were joined by hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people worldwide who were suddenly learning to work outside of the office on a scale never before seen in human history. And now, the first wave of the global pandemic is receding, and some major companies are wondering, will we continue to work remotely? Some of them are saying, yes, we will continue to work remotely. What we're hearing now is a global conversation about returning to work. And the question is, how much of our future work will happen in the office? So, as many of these organizations are making their choices, they're choosing remote work. 6 months ago, we said remote is the future of work, but now it feels like the future has arrived. This doesn't make it a simple transition. The speed at which we're all evolving brings many new challenges, but overall, there are definitely upsides to having a fully distributed team. With a robust strategy, you can have excellent organizational discipline. You can lower or balance your operating costs, and you have the opportunity to recruit the very best people from around the world. But between here and there, there's a lot that we need to learn and change. That starts with our understanding of what an office looks like and how to create one if you don't already have one. Then we have to intentionally redesign communication to avoid inefficiencies. And to make all of that happen, we have to be willing to break the rules of business as usual. But this is not the first or the last time that business and technology break the rules and transform our expectations. So the Eiffel Tower is one of my favorite examples of this. The tower was originally meant to be deconstructed after 20 years, but then radio came along. What do we see? A new potential as a broadcasting tower. The Eiffel Tower gained functional value in transmitting signals, and that kept it from being deconstructed. Ultimately, in World War I, it became instrumental in various operations and espionage, and now the tower hosts over 100 antennas for radio and television. So here's the radio room inside the tower in 1914. Terrible picture, but look, he's working remotely. If it was possible then, it's possible now with far less equipment. But my point is this: people are adaptable. Our habits are adaptable. The reality of our work is constantly evolving, and technology is merely a tool that allows us to continue adapting, experimenting, and surviving crisis after crisis. I don't need to remind anyone of the many years and difficult events between 1914 and now. And again, we find ourselves in an unfolding crisis. In this moment, we have an opportunity to frankly assess business and workplace practices and to look forward at what is becoming. The reality is this: we don't know when things will go back to normal, and we don't know if we want them to. It's good for everyone to develop an intentional, holistic strategy for remote work, whatever your current plans may be. So, operating a fully distributed enterprise is a learning process. It's a learning process for everyone. It's a learning process for GitLab. But as an open core organization, we've tried to document our approach in great detail, and we're very happy to share our findings and our best practices. So right now in this talk, I'm going to go over a few of the essential concepts for remote work. Our team handbook is over 3,000 pages, but the most important information in it boils down to three crucial understandings. First, the value of having a single source of truth. Second, the need to embrace asynchronous workflows. And third, the challenge to build trust and community no matter what the distance is between us. Let's start with the single source of truth. For us, this is the handbook. Remote teams need one single place where people can find the answers to their questions without having to wait for someone who may be on another time zone to give them an answer. A handbook is for documenting your best practices, for your policies, but it's also for information, how-to, and training. Imagine how many meetings you could avoid by having information clearly documented. How much efficiency does that build into your operation? Start building your documentation now. Keep it rigorously updated. And most importantly, allow your team members as much access as you can legally give them. This prevents information from being kept in individual drives. It prevents people from defaulting to asking questions instead of going to find the answer for themselves. After this talk, by the way, we're going to share the slides with you. So you'll see that there's a link to the handbook guide here, and you'll find links like that throughout. Or right now, as you're watching, you can go to about.gitlab.com/handbook, and you can see what our single source of truth looks like and what it contains. So moving forward, asynchronous workflows. What does it mean to assume that we're all asleep? What that means is that when you have a global team, you need to act as if nobody will be online at the time when you send them a message. So get used to adding full context to every message that you send so it can be read the next time your team member comes online and checks their messages. Be thoughtful. Before sending the message, breathe, think, and then add a little additional information. This is a screenshot on the right of a GitLab issue board. The entire GitLab team uses issues for all of our work. This is how we do our work throughout the company. It's a single source of truth, and it's a functional tool that allows us to have discussions, to take actions, and to share information without being tied to one-on-one conversations or meetings. When your team gets comfortable working this way, when they get comfortable working asynchronously, they can then design their days. And then you can design your day. Your work hours become flexible to reflect your lifestyle. They suit your family's lifestyle and your family's schedule, and they suit your own internal rhythm. It's better for mental health. It's much better for productivity, and it increases job satisfaction. Next, the big one we hear a lot from companies. A question that we often get right now is, how do you know when your employees are working? To that I ask, why do you want to know when your employees are working? Why does it matter how many hours they work or at what times, when what you really want to ask is, are they reaching their objectives? Building trust in remote teams goes both ways. So you can empower your team by letting them set their own hours, give them clear, transparent goals and metrics so that your work is not measured by whether you attended work or when, but by whether you were effective. One of the biggest challenges in remote work on top of that is loneliness. People miss each other. They miss the chance to socialize. They miss the chance to network. So build a human interaction into your process. It's less about showing up at the same time together, and it's more about being human together. Make sure that you're structuring informal communication. So for example, the GitLab team has coffee chats, which are 30 minutes where two people can get together and talk about anything but work. Likewise, encourage people to bring their full selves to work. Create chat channels for discussing various hobbies, for the cities that people live in, or even for skill sharing. Finally, be open yourself. Be open with your team about your challenges, about your successes, and about your ideals, the vision that you have for creating a remote culture. Ask for feedback and then act on it. Share the values that drive your organization and help people learn and grow through transparent human leadership. So earlier I mentioned that it can be challenging to break the rules, but we do have to do it. So these are a few simple transformative actions that you can start doing today. The first, every answer should be a link. This means if someone asks you a question, don't just give them the answer. Tell them where they can find the answer. It's not rude. It's inclusive, it's efficient, and it supports good documentation. Next, stop doing work in your chat tool. I think we all find ourselves doing most of our work where we can find people the most quickly, right? But that's not an effective, asynchronous, or sustainable way to do work. Use project management tools. Use an organized system of documentation, hopefully both. We actually automatically set our Slack messages to expire after 90 days. And what that does is it's a forcing function. It forces Slack to be only useful for informal communication, and it's useless then for synchronous work. Next, don't make it easy to call a meeting. Make it difficult for someone to organize a meeting. Think twice before breaking everyone's flow with something that could have been discussed in writing. Require every meeting to have an agenda, and allow people to decline the meeting, or allow them to stop paying attention in the middle of the meeting if it's not relevant and not moving their work forward. Next, every task or project needs to have an assigned person who's directly responsible for the outcome. This empowers individuals to truly own their work, and it also empowers the team to share responsibility for the team's outcomes. This is a big one for us. Reimburse co-working spaces and offices. Sometimes people want to work outside of their home. And if you don't have an office, then it's good for you to provide a space for them. It's inclusive. It gives people an atmosphere where they can work someplace that they feel comfortable. And sometimes it replaces those social interactions for them. So build that into your approach. And this last one is probably the most difficult. I personally struggle with it, and I know many people do. Sharing work before it's finished. To make work happen most efficiently, especially in an asynchronous flow, you need to get used to doing the smallest thing possible and getting it out as quickly as possible. So if you have a 10-step process, start with step 1, then get some feedback and then iterate on it. These are just a few things that you can start trying, but I guarantee that they will be challenging and that they will be transformative. But what about the big picture? What does remote transformation actually look like on the organizational level? At GitLab, we talk a lot about the various phases of transitioning to remote work. However, we are all now working remotely, so that transition is effective. Now we're starting to think about transitioning back. Will we go all the way back to the way things were with just the office, or will we stop somewhere along this continuum? Let's look at some of the options. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to work backwards from fully remote toward fully in the office. All remote. This is the highest stage of remote operation. And to be honest, even if your team is currently working remotely right now, you might not be in this stage for various reasons. For a company to be all remote, it must not have an office. Employees might use co-working spaces, but there is no official location. Work is done asynchronously, and individuals can choose when and where they work. Because of this, people can live anywhere on any time zone and still be a fully actualized member of the team. When the world began working from home due to COVID-19, many companies went to this model, remote, but with a bias toward a specific time zone or a set of time zones. This might be simply a result of people living in the same area, or it might be intentional. So as an example of intentional, InVision, which is a company based in New York, requires its employees to have some overlap with Eastern US hours. This can be a very effective way to run a fully remote organization. Many companies right now are currently operating as hybrid remote teams. And as soon as this pandemic subsides and we start to go back, many companies will shift into a hybrid remote model. There are endless ways to do this. So for example, a construction-oriented company could have its management working remotely while its crews are on the site. Or a product company might have its core team in the office together with remote resellers around the world. This is by far the most challenging model to use, and yet it is the most common. We see many, many risks with doing it this way, but the largest one is that employees become dissatisfied because they can sense or perceive that there is unequal treatment between people who are in the office and people who are out of the office. We don't recommend using a hybrid model in the long term. Think of it as a transitional stage. So perhaps you'll go back to this model where there is an office, but people are allowed to have telework days. This is also highly, highly common. Even the United States government did this before the pandemic, and I expect that after the pandemic, they'll return to it. It's easy to execute because you don't have to change very many of your practices. Of course, there are limitations. The main limitation is that employees still must live near one of the offices. And another one is that they still have to commute, which they hate. So this is something that is very, very close to being fully in the office. I'm not going to actually discuss being fully in the office, and I hope that one of these models will work for you. As you choose the model, it really depends on what is up to your team's preferences, your needs, your business operations. Once you decide what model you want to go for, we have guides that are available on the GitLab website to help you put together your strategy. But these are just a few of the key moves that you'll need to make to get you started. So first, get the executives out of the office. If you're going remote, the executives and leadership go remote first. Communication and culture follow leadership, so lead by example. Next, you'll build your tool stack. So people must be prepared. They have to have everything that they need to be able to do the work remotely, or else they'll stay in the office to do it. Next, treat everyone as remote. So no hybrid calls and no in-person meetings. Everything happens over Zoom or phone. Otherwise, people will continue to be in the office, or they will start to feel that things are unequal. Ensure that everyone has a suitable work environment away from the office and that they're fully functioning before you can transition. And then finally, iterate. Iterate, iterate, iterate. You didn't build an office overnight. You didn't build a team or a company overnight, and you won't go remote overnight. Again, be transparent about your process, where you're going. We're proud of what we've accomplished at GitLab. We have an 85% employee retention rate, and we've been named on multiple lists of best places to work, but it's been a learning process. We hope that we can help you to learn from our stumbles. We've published a playbook for remote work that has much more information than you heard here, and over 20,000 people have already downloaded it. So I'll share the link here, and please help yourself to the playbook. Things will never go back to the way that they were 6 months ago, but that's never happened anyway. We're living history together right now, and we have the opportunity to create a holistic transformation that will last. We are challenged now to go beyond our previous limits and to just possibly make things a little bit better for the future. Thanks for listening, and please get involved. Help yourself to any of the information available online, and please share your progress and your lessons learned with us on social media. And lastly, please feel free to get in touch with me for future discussions. I'm always happy to hear from people. Thanks so much, and now I'll open it up for any questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Jessica, for the presentation. I think now we would have some time for the Q&A left. I think she was also supposed to be here to take over the questions, but we lost her for a minute. Maybe we can give her a few seconds to join us again. As I can see her now, but I already saw that we got some questions, so let's wait a second until she joins. But she should be here pretty soon. In the meantime, until she's there, I think she will be there for a Q&A as well. I think we'll take a couple of minutes until she's back. In the meantime, what I can show you is something else. For example, already what is coming up. Let me quickly go back to my screen sharing and back to the agenda. So there we are. There you go. Yeah, I think after her, now we have a few minutes of Q&A as she's there. Ah, she's coming, perfect. I think there was a slight connection problem. So I will, for now, stop my screen sharing again as we are good to start with the Q&A. So hi, Jessica. Welcome again after the talk. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you well. That sounds good. All right, so then I would start with the Q&A as we have a few questions from the audience right now. The first question would be, how do you deal with resistance from employees towards the remote work approach?
That is a difficult question because I think there are many people who are resistant to the remote work approach. It's not easy. It's not an easy transition for anyone. And a lot of the resistance may come from leadership as well as employees. It's a big change for people. So I think that the realistic approach for something like this is to be patient and kind and to make people feel supported. So how do you make them feel supported? I think that that's an answer that we know, right? We know that people need to know that their job is safe. They need to know that they will be taken care of in case of any problems. They need to know that they will be accepted and that they'll fit in. So I think that those are the things that need to be covered so that people can get over their resistance. So one thing that we advise definitely doing is bringing people on well ahead of time, preparing them well ahead of time. Have lots of meetings very openly about the subject, about the transition, tell people what to expect, and then tell them exactly what you'll do for them so that instead of waiting for them to be resistant and then responding to their resistance, you are instead preparing them with everything that they need to know so that they can get used to the transition ahead of time. That said, if people are highly resistant, well into the process, then it becomes an individual matter, right? Because then usually you have one or two people who are really uncomfortable. And then that's a management issue that needs to be dealt with directly with them. And that's up to your own management processes. Sometimes that still happens. There will always be people who are concerned about change and what that means for them. There's no great answer, but it's usually an individual process when you get to that point.
All right, thank you very much. The next question that I got here is, are there like classical parts of the workforce that usually are hard to convince? Are there some favorites, so to say?
Classical parts of the workforce that are hard to convince to transition to remote work. You know, I think I'll say that there are parts that are easy. Generally, your engineering team and your developers are pretty easy to convince to go remote most of the time. Some developer teams are used to brainstorming in a room together, but generally people are comfortable doing their independent work and focus. So then what's the flip side of that? It's usually the people who have a lot of meetings and who are very concerned about wanting to make sure that their meetings go well. So I would say that's often leadership. Middle management, those can tend to be people who get the most worried about whether they'll be able to do their work.
All right. Thank you very much for this one. I think the other one that I have here is, well, I guess you can say yes, but I ask it anyway. Are you getting feedback from other companies on this all remote approach, especially during this time of the pandemic? Are you getting feedback from companies that are asking you, for example, hey, how do you do this and that? How can we maybe also apply these principles?
Yes, we are getting a lot of feedback. So we're working with companies constantly on this. We're consulting, we are meeting with leaders, we're hosting a lot of sessions, and we are hearing all sorts of different stories. So some of the questions that we get, they're generally very specific to people's experience. So a company that, for example, has always had one office in one town and they're deeply connected in their local community. Do they go remote? And at that point, do they lose the sort of local flavor that they have and the connection that they have in the community? What happens to their business reputation when they stop being supported by the community where they're located? I think that's a really interesting question. And I don't know that we know the answer to that one yet. I think that in addition to that, there are a lot of questions about how do we know that our employees will do their work if we can't see them working? That's a huge question. It comes up all the time. And I think I addressed this in the talk, but the answer is generally figure out how you can measure results instead of attendance. And that's our biggest answer for that one.
All right. I think the next one, I think you also mentioned some parts of it in the presentation, but maybe the person also was a bit late or the like. What would you say are classic pitfalls when embracing the approach, especially during the beginning?
Classic pitfalls, that is a great question. Let's see. I think one of the biggest issues that we are seeing in the past and we are seeing in the near future is companies attempting to go back to a hybrid remote model where some people are in the office and some people aren't. And as I mentioned, this can lead to people feeling unequal, like they have some people being treated one way and other people being treated another way. I think that is the most classic pitfall and really the number one for everyone to look out for. It affects all of us. And it even affects people at fully remote organizations. There's a sense of disconnection that happens when people are remote. And you want to make sure that you counteract that with a lot of personal connection and the feeling of being supported. Other pitfalls that can happen, communication is a huge one. So remote communication is difficult. It is subtle. It is easy for people to get lost and left out. So a classic pitfall is having some information given to some people and not given to everyone who needs it, or leaving some people looking for the answers to their questions for a long time, or just communicating something in a way that isn't clear. The whole process of communication needs to be rethought in remote work, and that is not easy. It takes a long time.
All right, thank you. The next one would be how to balance work life with personal life when you are increasingly working remotely, especially since the COVID-19 situation.
You know, if you have the answer to that question, please tell me. But no, I think that that's a really important one. And that's one that we've been working on at GitLab. Since the crisis, we, like everyone else, have been worried about employees' happiness and well-being. And it's very valid to be worried about people during a crisis. So we, at first, there was a communication strategy of, let's make sure that everyone at GitLab knows that they're supported, that people know that they can take time off if they need to. And so some announcements were made and communications were done to let the team know, listen, if you need to take time and go be with your family, that's a priority right now. Please go be with your family ahead of time. Don't wait for this, things to fall apart. Be proactive and take your time off. But that didn't happen. And what I think happens is that we're all home. We don't have anything to do but worry. So we choose to work instead. It's easy to work. Your computer is right there in front of you. And I know that I did this. It made me feel better to be distracted by my work instead of be distracted by the world. So after a couple of months, our CEO, Sid, noticed that productivity was up throughout the company, which is not exactly what he had expected. And in this case, he thought this is probably not a good thing. I want to make sure that my team isn't burning out. And so in the end, he's given us 2 company-wide shutdown days, and that's been a great decision. So once in May and once in June, the entire company has been shut down. No work happens for 1 day. And that was really effective, I think, in helping people to understand that they're allowed to take time off and that it's healthy to take time off. And as we all did it together, there was no pressure for anyone to work. The only pressure was to not work, which was a good reminder.
All right, thank you on this one. I think we're still getting questions and we have a few minutes left. So I would say let's go on. Let's continue. You mentioned that allowing people to decline meetings and even to stop paying attention if it's not relevant. Maybe this could create some kind of tension, or what would you here suggest or recommend as a good practice?
Yeah, that's always a controversial one. The meeting question, it can feel very rude for people to decline a meeting when you want them to be there, or to stop paying attention in the middle of the meeting. But isn't it more rude to call a meeting when it's not needed? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. So when I first started at GitLab, I was hosting a weekly stand-up call for my project. And it was going great. There was high attendance. Over time, there was a little bit of attrition. But there came a date when all of a sudden, a lot of people stopped showing up. And for me, that was a signal. Does this meeting still need to happen? Should I be calling it off? And I determined, yes, this can be called off. And so we stopped having the stand-up and we switched to asynchronous text communication about it. It's a question of efficiency, right? So efficiency is one of GitLab's values, but it's also generally a business value. And so how can meetings be done as efficiently as possible is the question. Are they more efficient if everyone is there? Probably not. Are they more efficient if people are there because there's something that absolutely needs to be discussed by those people in that time? Yes, that's very efficient. So the other side of this choice is that we record all of the meetings, so that if there is a meeting, somebody wanted to attend it, but they couldn't, they can always watch the recording later. And that way, everyone who wants to have access to the information and the discussion can. Even if someone wasn't invited, they can still access the information later. We take very detailed notes during the meeting. So there's an agenda document, and there's no assigned note taker. It is every person's responsibility to take notes in the document during the meeting, which can, it sounds a little chaotic, but you will see this living document, and then discussions start to happen during the meeting and in the agenda. And maybe you get to a discussion point and it no longer needs to be discussed because the question and the answer are there in the agenda. And so it starts to be actually extremely efficient, and everyone feels that they're contributing, and it feels very, I feel like it gives this attitude of we are using our time the best way we can. And I think that feels good for everyone who's involved. So think of it that way instead. Plan your meeting fully ahead of time. What do we actually need to discuss, and how can we do it the best way possible? And at that point, invite the people who need to be there. If you want to invite people and they don't need to be there, mark them as optional and allow people to say no if they don't feel that it's right for them. And then think about, on top of that, which pieces of the agenda could be also discussed in the project management tool. So could you move some of this discussion to an asynchronous discussion, or could you discuss it first in the meeting and then move it into the project management tool? Really take the time to rethink the whole meeting experience. One thing that you'll find in remote work that probably everyone is already finding is that there are tons of meetings. It creates so many more meetings than were previously. That's why we have a lot to say on this subject, and why we're very firm about the need for efficiency. So really, I recommend rethink the whole thing. It is not rude, it's efficient, and it allows people to choose how they're using their time. So your audio has dropped out for me, strangely.
Oh, is it now working again?
Yes, it's working now.
Okay, well, technology sometimes. No, I was saying, well, that's a very fair point from you for the answer on the last question, and now the next question. So I think it's the last one that we got for now, which also fits fine with the timing. How good would you say or do methodologies like Agile and value streams fit with the whole remote working approach?
So I love Agile in remote. I'm a big fan of Agile myself. I just think that it's a wonderful and modern and very efficient process. And I think that efficiency transfers over to remote very well. So I think that, you know, the question of mythology is a good one, because if we get too hung up on a concept and we don't work on the execution, then we run into problems. So I think that that's a well-framed question. There's the mythology of it versus the actual value that the system delivers. And I think that there's a lot of value in customizing your approach. Customize it for your team, customize it for your experience, for your environment, right? But in the end, those underlying concepts are about, you know, getting the most value out of the experience and out of people's time. And that is a good approach. So ultimately, I would say, you know, start with those as a foundation, but use your best judgment and feel free to customize. I think one thing that you'll run into with some of those highly efficient business processes is that they don't allow for human interaction and communication. And they don't allow for time to breathe, for people to have their own experience. And I think that that's something that's worth building in remote work, because if we focus solely on efficiency, then we lose our humanity and ultimately we lose people. And so then you have human attrition and then you're less efficient. So take the time to build in some time for people to have fun, to have interaction, personal connection, something that isn't super highly efficient. You can still have a great, strong, vibrant process, but if you make room for people, you will ultimately be better performing and more efficient in the end.
All right. I think that's a good conclusion towards the end. So thank you very much, Jessica, for your presentation and of course for going into a lot of questions. So there was a lot of feedback on the approach, which I would say also indicates that this is yeah, most relevant, more relevant than ever. So thanks for joining us. And to the audience, if you have additional questions for Jessica that maybe also come up later or tomorrow, feel free to send them also to me or to the other GitLab speakers. We're happy to forward everything to Jessica as well. So thanks for joining, Jessica.
Thank you so